So let's take a look at how we can go about posing our characters in Daz Studio. So one way might be to pop open your character hierarchy and find the individual bone you want to pose, like the left collarbone here. Then under parameters, we can access the transform controls and just twist, rotate, or bend that into position. But that's obviously quite a slow process. So instead, we could grab the universal tool here and select any bone and use the transform gizmo to rotate or position these bones, like so. And manipulating the pose this way is definitely a bit faster. We've also got this tool here that I might just demo on the shoulder bone. These blue, green, and red rings here correspond to the red, green, and blue transform controls over here, which is basically the X, Y, and Z axis of each bone. So if we click and drag the blue ring, that rotates the bone on the Z axis, the green on the Y axis, and the red the X axis. Or we can tweak a combination of all three axes by dragging the sphere around here in the center, which can help pose the bone a bit faster and more organically. Another advantage of using the universal tool is that we can use pinning, which is represented by this little thumbtack icon here. So if we grab a bone and click on this, we can choose to pin the translation, which is the position, and we can pin the rotation as well. And now if we grab another bone, maybe one on the other side of the body, if we move that around, you can see that our pinned bone stays locked in place. Whereas if we were to unpin those and try moving that again, that whole top part of the body is being pulled in that direction as well. So aside from the universal tool, another good tool for posing is the active pose tool here, which works much the same way. We can still click on any bone and move it easily into place. But the advantage of this is that we get a few extra options. If we click here on the tool settings, we get this extra panel related to our active pose tool. And this tool also lets us use pins in a slightly different way. If we grab a bone, we can pin this into place easily by clicking toggle pin. And that's represented by the red pin icon here, which again will allow us to manipulate other bones while keeping the pin bone in place. We also have accuracy controls in here, which allows us to slow down the movement of the bones as we position them. So if we make this more accurate, you'll see that moving the bones is now much slower, which allows us to very carefully pose each bone and get them into more intricate positions. Or we can take this back the other way, and the bones become very loose and free-flowing. And we can add multiple pins nice and quickly with this tool as well. We just need to grab another bone and toggle the pin on there as well, which will allow us to manipulate the lower half of the model without affecting those arms. And removing pins is just as easy. We just need to click unpin all. And if you do prefer this method of posing, you might want to set a keyboard shortcut to toggle your pins on and off, so you don't need to come back and forth from here. So to do that, we just need to hit F3 on the keyboard to bring up the customization window. And if we scroll down to the power pose section, you can find the toggle pins action in here. And if we right click on that, we can set a keyboard shortcut, which asks us to set any key we'd like to use. In this case, I'll go with the letter P, which is apparently already set to another command, but I think we'll just overwrite that and hit yes, and accept that. And now if we grab a bone and hit P on the keyboard, we can very quickly add pins to where we need them. And if we hit P again on the same bone, they'll also be removed. So that'll definitely speed up your posing workflow. So that's the active pose tool. And if we ever mess up our pose completely and need to reset all of the bones, we just need to click up here and restore figure pose. Or with our character selected, we can hit Ctrl-Shift-S on the keyboard, which puts her back in the original A pose. So let's move on to the next posing tool, the power pose, which has its own tab here. And if you don't see this, you can also find it up here under Window, Panes, and Power Pose is right here. And in there, we have this representation of our character, where we can easily choose any bone we like. And to manipulate the pose, we can use these controls down here. So if we click on a bone and drag left to right, that's going to rotate the bone back and forth. Then dragging up and down is going to bend it. And if we right click instead and drag side to side, we get that same rotation. But holding the right mouse button and dragging up and down will twist the bone. So you might find that this is an easier way to do your posing. You'll also notice that some of these controllers look a bit different. We've got a circle with dots around it, and a diamond one here as well. The diamond allows us to reposition the entire model nice and easy. The circle with the dots around it means we can select multiple bones. So this one, for example, is for the whole right arm. So we can manipulate that all together, and you can see it's bending as well. And if we switch to the right mouse button, we can twist that as well. So we can get some pretty quick poses out of this. This point in the middle here lets you move both legs together at the same time. And this one does both arms together as well. And I think this one rotates the head. And that leads us to the head controls here. So with the head still selected, we can hit Control F to frame up on that. And we can start posing the facial expressions with these controls. So we could drop that eyebrow and maybe raise this one. And this one controls the direction the eyes are pointing in. Then we could grab the chin and open the mouth, or use these to give her a bit of a smile. And we can use this one to make her wink, like so. Okay, let's click back here to the main body controls. And we also have a separate controller for the hands. So let's frame up on her left hand, which corresponds to the left hand here. So we can grab the circles again and manipulate each finger bone, or grab the circle with dots and tweak the whole finger together. So we can really quickly pose these. And this one in the middle affects all the fingers at once. And here's the thumb. And this definitely makes posing your hands much easier, I think. So that's the main posing tools available in Daz. But a lot of the time, it's easiest to start with a pre-made pose from our pose library. So let's just grab a different character and take a deeper look at that. Okay, we now have our Charlotte 8 character back in the default pose. So let's take a look at the products we've bought that include poses, which we can find here in the Smart content. But I find it's a bit easier to find things over in the Files tab, because now if we look at poses, it shows us every pose available rather than for each product. So we can quickly find a pose we like. And I also think they're a bit better organized in here as well. So let's find a pose by function, and maybe an action pose would be cool for our Charlotte character. And we've got some jumping and kicking and punching poses in here. So let's try one of those. And as usual, we'll leave the limits on. And that looks pretty cool. So we can really quickly and easily try a few different poses. Let's filter this by jumping poses and give this one a go. And that's a bit Trinity from the Matrix. We can also filter these by region, which means part of the body. So here's the full body poses. Let's try this sitting pose. Nice. Then we have partial body poses, and we can show only poses for the arms, for example. So if we just wanted to change this left arm, we could grab a left arm pose from in here. Let's find something dramatic, maybe this one. And that's only affected the left arm like so. And we have poses for all the other body parts. So let's go into legs, and we'll just apply a different right leg pose. Okay. Further down, we also have facial expressions. So let's just frame up on her face. And because a lot of these expressions are designed for different characters, they're not all going to look great on Charlotte here, but let's give it a try. Let's try this angry face, which definitely looks a bit goofy on our character, but still not a bad starting place. Let's try another one. Okay, that one's definitely a bit creepy. Let's try a more neutral one. Anyway, I think you get the point. So let's take a look at some other things we can do with the pre-made poses. What if we decided we really like what this left arm's doing and we wanted to copy that exact same pose over to the other arm? One way we could do it is grab the root bone of that arm, which is going to be the shoulder here, which is actually the left collarbone here. If we right click on that and select the children, which selects all the bones in that arm, we can then click here on the options icon and use the symmetry function, which gives us this pop-up here where we can specify how we want the symmetry to behave. So I think in our case, we'll need to take a look at the direction, which is currently set to mirror left to right, which is exactly what we want because we're going from the left arm across to the right. So all we need to do is hit accept. And now the pose from the left arm has been copied to the corresponding bones on the right arm. And another thing we could do is grab another pose preset, maybe from the jumping section here. And if we wanted to, we can apply a full body pose like this and have it only affect a particular part of our model. So if we grab a leg, for example, and select all the children again of that right thigh, if we want that leg to inherit only the bent leg part of this jumping pose, all we need to do is hold Control and double click on here to bring up the pose preset options. And if we switch the node type from root to selected, we're basically telling Daz to only apply this pose to the leg which we've selected. And we also need to set the propagation to selected only as well. And if we leave the rest as is and hit accept, only the right leg part of that pose has been applied. And you can see that now matches this, but the rest of the model stays how it was. So that's a pretty handy tool for quickly mixing and matching different poses together. So let's talk about a few ways we can reset our model if our posing goes horribly wrong. One way we can do it is by grabbing our character and down under the options here, we can select Restore Figure Pose, which restores that original A pose. Or we can undo that and grab our Active Pose tool. And now if we click anywhere on our character, we get our posing tools up here. And if we click on this icon, we can restore the pose from here as well. And another way we can do this is with our character selected, we can go back to the options, and this time under 0, we can 0 our figure, which gives us that exact same starting A pose. But what this actually does is set all the transform values on every bone back to 0, which at this point is exactly the same thing. But the reason why you might want to reset the pose instead of zeroing everything out is that you can actually set your own custom default pose, which at any time you could restore to. So rather than having the A pose as the default pose, we can reset to, let's make it our current pose. So to do that, we just need to go back here again with our character selected, and this time we'll choose Memorize and memorize our figure pose. And now if we go back to poses and just give our character a different pose, if at any time we wanted to revert back to our memorize pose, all we need to do is come back here and restore figure pose, which now gives us the memorize pose instead of the A pose. Okay, we can also restore partial poses as well. So if we wanted to restore just this leg, we just need to select that again and the children. And we'll just 0 this out this time by choosing 0 selected items. And all transforms on that leg are reset to 0, which straightens it out like so. Another thing we can do is save the current pose as a preset that we can then use to pose any other figure we like. So with our character selected, we'll need to go to the content library, and under Daz Studio Formats, we'll export our current pose into our Daz 3D library by right-clicking on there and creating a subfolder, which we'll call Custom Poses. And then we can right-click on our new folder and find it on our computer by clicking Browse to Folder Location. And we can copy this location so we can save our new pose preset into there and easily find it again. So we'll close that. And again, with our character selected, we'll go to File, Save As, and we'll save a pose preset. And we just want to put this in that same folder we created. So I'll just paste the directory into here. and we can name it whatever we like. I'll just go with something like cool pose and save. And we do want to save the pose from the current frame, so that's fine. And we'll just make sure that we're saving the pose data from all the bones. And hit accept. And here's our new pose preset with a thumbnail of our character as well. So now, if we reset our character pose again, at any time we can double click on our custom pose to apply that again. And we can use this exactly the same way we would with a pose from the Daz store. So we could apply it to any other character we want. And we could also share the pose with someone else as well. Okay, so let's take a look at some other tools we can use for posing our characters. If we come up to Window, Panes, let's open up the Puppeteer tool, which has been docked over here. Basically, this is going to allow us to store a series of different poses and blend between them to create a custom pose. So let's start with a few poses from our library. If we go to Function, let's try Dancing Poses. And we have this product installed, which has some dance moves. So we'll go in there and see if we can find those. Here we go. So with our character selected, let's apply this first one. And now, over in our Puppeteer window, we can click anywhere on this grid, which gives us a little dot that represents the current pose. And then we can add another pose. And so we don't get this pop up every time, let's just tick this so Daz remembers our preference. And now we can leave the limits on, which will now be on automatically by default. And now with our new pose, let's click in here again to capture that pose. Then we might go with something a bit more extreme, like this move here. And again, we'll click to add that pose to our Puppeteer as well. And we'll add one more pose. Let's go with this one here. And add that as well. And now, if we switch to preview mode here in the Puppeteer, if we click on this dot, we switch back to that first stored pose, which was this one here, then the second pose, and the third pose, etc. And the cool thing about this setup is that we can also click and drag between these to blend from one pose to the next. And we can even get a blend of all 4 poses, which is a really quick way of coming up with interesting custom poses for your characters. Plus, you could also use this to store a bunch of poses quickly for easy access. We can also take a look at the Puppeteer options here and add another layer. Okay, and that gives us the second grid here. So maybe this time we'll just do a series of upper body poses instead. So let's hit Ctrl-Shift-F on the keyboard, which is the shortcut to reset our model back to the A pose. And this time we'll select some poses by region, partial body, and upper body. So let's grab this one and store that pose, which we need to do back in edit mode. Then we'll do this one and store that. And this one, and we'll just do 3 this time. And now if we go to preview again, we can blend the poses together on this layer as well. And if we switch to record mode and pop open the animation timeline down here, in the record mode, if we now click and drag between our stored poses, you can see that that's now being recorded to keyframes on our timeline. And if we rewind that back to the start of the keyframes, we can play that back as an animation. So you could use this to create some funky dance moves, or just as a way to come up with some cool poses. So that's the basics of posing in Daz, and that should lead us nicely into the next lesson, where we'll look at animation.